Hello! A little while ago I took a first look at the RunCam VRX unit for OpenIPC, and he may be wondering, well, he's taking his time getting stuff flying, isn't he? Hurry up. And I wanted to go out and fly this at least a week ago, but it turned out I had an issue with it. And the issue was, when I plugged it into my HD0 goggles, it didn't detect an HDMI input. So I worked through this issue with RunCam support, and they basically diagnosed we had a hardware issue. Not too uncommon. When you're getting pre-release units like this, sometimes there's problems or all the bugs aren't ironed out yet. However, I got myself a new one. It comes in the retail packaging, so I thought I'd just show you what's in there. It's very slightly different to what we got. I mean, you've got the packaging for starters, so you can see the VRX unit there. That is pretty much just the same. You've then got this little box of interesting things. Two antennas there, another two different antennas there, got the power cable, and interestingly they give a mini to regular size HDMI cable. So that's what the VRX unit looks like, all connected, and this will slot in like so. If you watch the original video, I had some problems with the HDMI. It seemed to not go in. Now they haven't changed the mold at all, but what I do notice is that this is slightly longer than the three cables I had, including a brand new one I bought from Amazon. I'll get a close-up picture of this, but if you can just see that, there's just a few mil difference in it. But fortunately I also bought a couple from AliExpress which were mini to minis, and these are slightly longer as well and they fit well. So just be aware, there are different cables out there and you want the one they pack in that size and that will fit in nicely. So without further ado, let's go and fly something with this and see how well it receives and records. But just before we do that, a quick word from our sponsor today, which is PCBWay.com. PCBWay can prototype and assemble PCBs for you. If you design your own PCBs, then you are probably well aware of them. Now, I don't know much about PCB design, but with open source hardware becoming more popular, they'll give out Gerber files, which is all you need to get your PCBs made. In fact, if you go to the shared projects section on PCBWay.com, you'll be able to see lots of open source projects that you could get PCBWay to make for you. But it's not just PCBs. CNC machining, laser cutting, sheet metal bending, 3D printing and injection molding are just some of the extra things they can do, and in materials that are way out of reach for most hobbyists. So if you want to look at having them make something for you, check them out at PCBWay.com. Okay, we're at the field, it's a good day, and we've got the RunCam VRX ready to test. You see I've got my small mini to mini HDMI cable there. Let's hope this works quite well. Certainly tested it in the office and on the desk, but it just depends if it responds to me like shaking my head around and standing up and stuff like that. It's a bit windy, because it always is. Wind's coming from behind me. Hopefully you're not hearing that much of it. And we are going to be testing a few quads with it. This is my new frame I built up, and this has got the WifiLink 2 in there, just in the back, nestled a bit. We've got the previous version, which is the original WifiLink, which is on this quad. Flown this before, works quite well. A barometer seems screwed for some reason. And we got the little Emax 1S board, which runs at about 100 milliwatts, and I had problems with focusing the camera and it sort of went out of range when I went behind that bush instantly. So hopefully we'll get a proper flight of that. Maybe a bit windy for this, but we'll see. Hello, it's me from the future, currently editing the video. I just wanted to say about the type of footage we got from it, because I had a lot of problems trying to get my videos off here, which I go on about. What I found is that my HD0 goggles also automatically recorded the HDMI in. I didn't know that at the time, and after the first 3 flights I put a GoPro on the quad which didn't have an SD card in, so I stole it from my goggles, not thinking the goggles were doing anything. But I've got some of that footage, and it will allow me to show more about what I was seeing versus what you see on the DVR, because I found they're quite different between them. So yeah, let's jump back in. Okay, so here's the start of my first flight. I'd left it on the ground for about 5 minutes to get sat. It only got up to 7, and I started wondering if my position of the GPS versus where the receiver is was a problem, but it actually got better later. So this is the goggle view, and you can see up the top right, this is information that you get in OpenIPC in the goggle view, which you wouldn't get in the DVR recording. Now, my first impression of this was actually quite disappointing. It looks pretty good when I'm editing it, but I got the impression that everything looked and felt
a bit jerky, and I guess it's more about the feel rather than how it looks. It just didn't seem like it was hitting 60 frames a second, let alone 120 frames a second. It just felt juddery, and I thought to myself, this is weird, because when I was using my NVR board and getting the direct feed to my goggles, it felt a lot smoother. That is my memory, and it's more about feel than how it looks. But I didn't understand why this wasn't giving me the same sort of thing. Picture wise, it was okay. I mean, I think we got a problem in a lot of systems with grass, whereas you can see a bit of detail, and further out it just sort of smushes the grass in this big blur. It always looks a bit sharper when you're up higher, but down close the grass looks very smudgy. So I wanted to see how this would react. I didn't want to take it too far away because this is a brand new build and I hadn't tested rescue mode or anything at this point. So what I did is I took it a little bit further out behind some trees, and this is where I managed to get a little bit of locking up of the system. So on that flight I just had one of them, which is this thing here, just as I was on the turn, which is of course the worst time. I had to cut this test a little short. You'll see on the screen a little black blob, which is a dog that saw my quad and decided to chase it. His owners were blowing a whistle, and they blew it like 10 times, 20 times, and I'm thinking to myself, you know, after the first 20 times, if your dog's not coming back to your whistle, it's probably not coming back. So I came into this field thinking they'd retrieve their dog, but nope, it followed me into the field and was barking. They're still blowing the whistle. They're convinced this dog's trained to come back on the whistle, but it's not. So what I ended up doing is basically going and hovering just behind where those people are walking now so they could get it. But yeah, very ineffective. It's like the definition of stupidity. If what doesn't work, you just keep repeating it, expecting a different result. But no, that dog was not coming back to the whistle, but they eventually got him. So this is the same flight again, and what I've done, I've put on the left the DVR recording from the VRX and on the right my goggles recording, just to show you the difference. It is quite subtle, but if you look at the way sort of the lines move in the grass and how the trees move, you can see it's definitely jerkier in my goggles view but smoother on the DVR, and I don't know why, but like I want the smooth bit, not the sort of jerky bit. It's very interesting that it sort of happened like that. Now, one question I had was, is it too much for the VRX to both record and feed you the picture? Is it the fact it was recording as well an issue, and that was causing the problem? But when I took off for my second battery, I'd actually forgot to press the record button. So this is off my goggles, and it is the only thing that's recording. There's nothing recording on the VRX. And again, it looks better than it felt in the DVR, but it still felt the same to me. On this second flight, I tried flying a little bit differently, like going behind this bush here. I'm on the other side and the trees are in the way. I should mention as well that there's a slight change from what the camera came with on the WifiLink 2, but you'll just see it lose quite a bit here as we're lined up behind the trees. And although it's like a second or so, it's very scary. Those seconds can draw out and feel like a long time when you're not in control. Yeah, so this comes with a TX override power of 20, which is equivalent to about 40 milliwatts. So I did bump the camera's power up, or I should say the Wi-Fi power up, to 55, which is equivalent to about 700 milliwatts, but it's not really equivalent to talking like that in analog terms, because of course the way it degrades, it doesn't just do it gently, it basically stops. But I'm glad to have caught these sort of incidents in the goggles, because on the DVR it just stops where it's a bit dodgy. Here you can see like what I saw, which is like, I don't know where I am. On the DVR it will just jump to the bit where we got the signal back fully. So this is the DVR recording of flight 3, where I've changed over to the quad with the RunCam Wi-Fi 1, and I thought to myself, this is weird, this is really smooth, until I realise it's playing at half the speed. What had happened is I'm getting 120 frames ish per second, and I set the DVR in the settings to be 60, and I thought it would record at 60 frames a second, but what it seems to have done is record 120 frames but at 60 frames a second. So if you look at the seconds, each one is taking 2 seconds to go. So in order to show you this, I have the double the speed, which looks like this, a little bit more normal, and it doesn't look like I'm going quite as slow. As I said, the DVR recording looks better than the live view. If you go past things, they're not quite as jerky and things, and it looks okay. For me though, in my live view, this wasn't as good because this is a quad I've flown multiple times before on the NVR, and it just wasn't the same as before, which I thought was weird. Nice to see a couple of deer in the field there. I wasn't sure what it was when I first looked, but yeah, we got 3 deer sitting there, not scared apparently by the quad. Deer seem to be scared of everything, but I'm guessing they're like, we don't recognise this flying thing as a predator, so they just sort of sat around. They certainly looked at me because I was making a noise, but they weren't too fussed about it, which is cool. So this thing flew okay, and as you can see, we've got quite a nice recording here, so I haven't got a problem with that one. But it started to make me wonder, what is the difference here between what I was using on the NVR and what I'm using on the RunCam VRX? Is it antennas, or is it something else that's working differently? But you know, latency wise, I didn't really feel anything was wrong, and I was able to, you know, do some light acro stuff without feeling that I was going to suddenly lose it or something like that. So the quad is flying fine, it just didn't feel quite right, albeit it looks much better than I felt it was in the DVR recording. Still looks like blurry and stuff with grass, but to be honest, Walk Snail doesn't cope very well with grass and generally turns things into a smear, so it's not the worst thing ever. Now, the reason I took the memory card out of the goggles and put it in the GoPro was because I basically came back with the other quad with the GoPro on it to sort of try and film the deer nicely, which seems to have gone okay. They weren't too worried about my presence, so I got some little scenes with them and I got to fly around some more. The DVR playback of this seems to leave a black space instead of jumping forward, which is what happened when I played it before, which is quite interesting. Basically, anytime you see like this black is where it sort of froze up a little bit, and I was left without a picture. Usually over here when I'm slightly on the turn or going behind that tree. So it's only the goggle recording that can show the actual sort of, you know, the breakup and the weird digital noise that you can get when we're not getting a good picture. I mean, it was very flyable, don't get me wrong there. I just couldn't figure out why it seemed jerky to me when previously the much cheaper NVR board seemed smooth. Completely weird to me, but then I discovered something interesting. I've swapped over to the little 2-inch quad, which has got the Emax 100 milliwatt board on it, and what I noticed from this one, despite it looking a bit jerky here because it's small and the wind's blowing it around, this felt a lot smoother in the goggles. So is it something to do with the transmitter antennas on the VTX, or is it something else? But it's like, that's weird. Why is this one working so well while the other one's not? I say it's working so well. I should explain 2 things about this little Emax board. I had a pre-production unit, so it had a 3D printed camera mount. If you recall from watching the first one, it was out of focus. I've tried my best to get it in focus and it's better, but you can also see if you look at the bottom right corner that it's got some light leakage through because it's just a piece of 3D printed plastic, so the light is managing to penetrate it. So that is not so hot in terms of how it flies. However, it was a lot smoother, so it's clearly possible to get very smooth things on the VRX. It's just a question of what I need to do differently on my other quads. Something else I also messed with this, because I thought to myself, well, is it something to do with mismatch of frame rates? Because I'm flying at 720p at 120 frames a second. Perhaps I should change it to 1080p and see what happens. And that was interesting as well. So what I did is put it in 1080p 90 because I thought there was a much better matchup with the goggles. What I have to do is change the rate to 150% of normal in order to get it to look correct. But the most interesting thing I noted there is at 1080p we have a wider field of view. You can see the props on the motors here, where previously on the 720p 120 you couldn't. I didn't know it did that. because I did feel occasionally it was a little thin, the view. I noticed it when I was doing like split S's. It was not quite right, but where you've got this a bit wider, it feels better. So on 1080 it means you've got slightly high latency, but again I couldn't really feel a difference. But I thought it was interesting, and there's certainly things to try and change and optimize and see what we get for the very best situation. So I flew about 12 packs through 3 quads, so I felt pretty confident with what was happening and what the limitations were. For me, limitations were a little bit on range and penetration, but in terms of things like latency, everything felt pretty good. In terms of the picture, it was a bit of a mixed bag really. Sometimes it would look quite nice, sometimes it would look really smeary, and I was like, ugh, that's horrible. But overall, you know, they worked, they did the job. The question was though, getting the stuff off of the VRX. This was my problem, so let's talk about that next. If you watched my introduction video to these, you'll know that if you hold the 5-way joystick to the right, it will say starting AP mode and then come up with an access point where you can connect to it via your computer. So what should happen is you'll get an access point that says Redaxa ground station, and you can attach to that. And then if you set your browser to the Redaxa URL or the IP address, you'll be able to go into the internal storage, download video files, change settings, that sort of thing. All easy peasy, or so I thought. And to be clear, I'd made all those recordings on the internal memory of the Redaxa. So when I got home, I plugged this in to some power, gave it a screen, held my joystick over, and it said starting access point. Redaxa ground station, and then when I went to my computer, nothing. And at first I thought, not a problem. In the previous VRX I had, maybe 1 in 10 times I noticed it didn't come up, and what I did is just reboot it and then it would be fine. On this particular one, I tried it like 30 times and nothing was happening. I just did not have an access point. I tried it on my computer, I tried it on my phone, I tried it everywhere. It just was not coming up. I even bought this USB-C to Ethernet adapter because the theory was we should be able to use one of these USB ports, I think the one labelled OTG, to connect that way. But that didn't work. So I was feeling pretty bad because literally my entire day's flying was on there and I couldn't get access to it. At this point I didn't know I had any goggles recording, which was a little bit of a bonus for me. So I talked to Mary FPV, who tried to help, and we looked at it and it was very strange. We didn't really get what was going on. Eventually we came up with the idea of if we could boot it from a memory card in a different version, then we could log on to a Linux shell that way and then mount the internal storage. What happened though, when I booted it, it didn't boot from the SD card. SD card booting, it seems to work like 60% of the time, and sometimes it just seems to ignore the card and boot its normal thing. This time it booted, didn't read the memory card, but when I activated the AP mode, it came up. And I was like, oh my god, it's here, no one do anything. And then I very rapidly got all my video files down. I changed a couple of settings. One was the screen mode. I'd set that to 1980 by 1080 at 60. The goggles I have will do 90, so I changed it to 90. The DVR recording is still at 60 frames a second. I'm not sure if I should just change that to 120 or if I can, because I got my stuff off. I subsequently have tried getting the access point again and it's not coming up. So it's like the 1 in 100 times this has worked versus the 1 in 10 times this may not work but will work the next time. So I'm really confused about why that is. I have asked RunCam about like what's going on, like help. Basically I emailed them before I got it back saying help, my footage is in the internal memory, I can't get the AP mode on, can I do anything? Because there is a couple of little jacks here, one which says TX RX ground. Could that be somewhere we could add a serial connection, and if we do, is like Getty running on it so we can actually log in? I don't know. Obviously if I plug a SD card in and I hit the record, then it does record to the card. That bit works fine, but sometimes you want to go in and you want to change settings, and if it's too dodgy about that, then that's an issue. So I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just my one,
Maybe it's the version of the software they put on, or they've done some changes. I don't know, but I will endeavour to find out, because we need to be able to get into this at any time we want. That aside, these performed pretty well. It's the first time I've been able to record something on the goggles and I'm not laden down by like other things. I mean, it was quite interesting. I had two 5200 4S's in each pocket, one plugged into goggles, one plugged into this. What I need is like a splitter, because that battery is more than capable of running both things. So it felt a little bit heavy in the pockets and a little bit heavy on the goggles, because this is not too light, but it worked. As I said, I wasn't happy about the judderiness I've got. So in my next video, aside from seeing if I can get this to work consistently on getting the access point, what I want to do is have a look at what settings I can do and what I can do to improve things. One of the things I noticed they talked about on the OpenIPC Telegram group was about these linear antennas we get on the WifiLink 2. According to the testing some people had done on the group, they weren't basically capable of performing above 5700. So the range of their channels should be much lower, and of course I was on 5805 because it's closer to 5800. So I mean, we can change frequency or we can change antennas completely. I'm slightly miffed that the antennas on these ones are RPSMA. On the retail package, these are two linears and you've got two left-hand polarized antennas. Don't know why it's left-hand polarized. I suppose it just goes with everything else, like Walk Snail and DJI use left-hand polarized, but everything on these quads is linear anyway. So what I wanted to do is put like a bunch of like right-hand polarized antennas on the quad and some more right-hand polarized antennas, patches here, and a sort, you know, regular pagodas or something. But I don't think I've got enough that are RPSMA, because pretty much everything in FPV is SMA until digital came along, and then they've sort of ruined it again. So yeah, I'll be going back and doing some more tests, trying to tune everything to work as well as possible, and we'll take this one as a baseline and see how we can improve it, see what works, see what doesn't work. That'll be coming up in the next few weeks. In the meantime, of course, you can get the WifiLink 2 and the VRX from links down below. Hope the review's been helpful, and I will catch you next one. Bye for now.
Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.